Hello and welcome back to SimonsRants. I'm Simon, and today I'm going to be explaining the ending of Beau is Afraid. Before I get to the ending though, I want to do a little bit of backtracking and talk about the movie in general, because in case you don't know what this movie is about, probably shouldn't be watching a video explaining the ending of it, but anyway, the basic concept of it is that Ari Aster's new film starring Joaquin Phoenix follows a man who has some sort of anxiety disorder where he views the world through a lens of fear. From the very beginning of this movie, we are seeing everything that is happening through his lens. It's not meant to be taken literally, it is how he's perceiving the world around him with his condition, whether it's anxiety or something worse than that. So he sees the people outside of his apartment killing, raping, and doing all sorts of terrifying things right outside. This is symbolic of and represents how he feels and sees the world around him. So as he's visiting with and speaking with his therapist, they decide that he needs to be on something a little different. He's already taking medication, but it's obviously not working because the world around him is still terrifying and confusing. There are multiple things that just straight up don't make sense around him. So he's put on a new different medication, and from there, things actually seem to get worse. The writer and director of this movie, Ari Aster, has talking about how he has anxiety, but he's terrified of medication. He doesn't like taking medication because he's afraid that it will mess with his mind further. And I believe that that is, in essence, the basic plot of this movie is medication gone wrong. We see throughout the movie that he switches medication and he's given medication that he is unaware of what it is multiple times throughout this movie. If you've seen it, you'll know obviously he changes medication from his therapist as we just talked about, but he's also given a completely different medication that's not specified by Nathan Lane's character, the surgeon. He's also given some unnamed drug by the surgeon's daughter, and then later when he's in the woods with the actors, the lady who's pregnant gives him a cup of something and never specifies what it is either. And you'll note that every time he's given this new medication or new drug or whatever it is, that's when the hallucinations, that's when the crazy events that are happening amp up to another level, and they keep getting worse with each passing medication, each dose. So in essence, this movie is about a man who has mental problems that are being provoked now by worse and worse drugs. So throughout this movie, he is having an episode, or in essence, a bad trip, or trips. It's progressively getting worse as each trip takes him to a deeper, darker place that is fueled by his anxiety and how he already views the world, muddled together with some drugs that he's not prepared to take. But that leads us to what is the whole point of the ending of the movie, because we can look at this movie and say, okay, so a lot of this is just tripping out on drugs. It's a really bad trip, kind of reminiscent of how in Midsommar people were surmising that maybe that whole movie's just a bad drug trip. Not that I believe that or anything, but there's definitely some hints at that in there. So if this movie is just a bad drug trip, what does all the things happening in there, what does all the imagery actually mean? And obviously, I think the most obvious thing in this movie is his relationship with his mother is really bad. We see throughout flashbacks and the plot just being played out in front of us that his mother is the main reason he is the way he is. Whether it's genetic or it's how she raised him or a combination of both, she has made him afraid of everything. Partially by claiming that his dad died while having sex, so sex is off limits because it's a terrifying, awful thing and he could die, or actually will die, she claims, if he has sex just one time. She also blames the father for everything, claiming even in the trailer we see the clip where she says,
I am so sorry for what your daddy passed down to you.
Putting all of the blame on him instead of taking the blame herself, despite knowing and clearly stating that she had just as bad of a relationship with her own mother and was made the way she is by her relationship with her mother. And despite her best intentions to not pass that down to Beau, that's exactly what she did. She took that one step further though by making him ashamed of what he was, being a man. Everything she ever says about men is a negative thing, and she makes him terrified of himself, his body, his genitalia, and his sex. This is culminated by the moment when he goes up into the attic and is confronted with the supposed father, which is a giant penis-shaped monster. monster. I'm sorry to laugh at that, but it is quite the visual. But what that's there to represent is his fear, his disgust for, and resentment of his own genitalia, his own body, his own sex. It represents everything that he is terrified and ashamed of by having a penis, by having this thing that supposedly will kill him the instant he uses it, and that he is in essence evil and bad because he is a man. That is how he's been trained mentally by his mother. And this is further compounded by his own anxiety that's already in him and ingrained in him, because we see just before that he has sex for the first time, and obviously he doesn't die, so he was being lied to. He doesn't have to be worried, but as anxiety often manifests in us, when it's proven wrong, it just moves the goalposts one step further. So he then sees in this state that no, he didn't die, but the woman he was making love to, having sex with, she died. So as with all things anxiety, when it is proven wrong and shown that in reality you have nothing to be anxious about, you have nothing to be afraid of, it doesn't work that way, and it will choose something else to latch onto and to be afraid of. So it moved the goalpost and said, okay, well, you didn't die, but you are causing other people to die. And so now you can continue the shame, you can continue the fear, you can continue to have this anxiety in this, because maybe you didn't die, but something else terrible is going to happen. That brings us finally to the very last scene in the movie, which is actually my favorite scene in the whole movie. After escaping from the attic, he runs away and hops into a tugboat and goes off into the night. At a certain point, the tugboat, however, stalls out, and all of a sudden lights turn on and he is in a big amphitheater or coliseum. He is surrounded by people all looking down on him, not least of which is his mother, who sits next to a lawyer condemning him of all the wrong he's done. They project his worst memories up onto the screen, memories of failure, memories of embarrassment, memories of things he just doesn't want to remember, and accuse him of all the wrongs he's done throughout his life. They take things out of context, they bend the truth, and they straight up lie, telling him that everything that he thinks is wrong. Now, he does have a defense attorney, but the defense attorney is all the way across the stadium on the other side and does not have a microphone. So he attempts to scream his defense out, but it goes primarily unheard, and then actually even gets crushed out. He gets thrown off the cliff and is destroyed. And I absolutely love this scene because it's such a beautiful and perfect example and metaphor for what it's like to be inside the head of somebody with anxiety or depression or any one of these mental illnesses, because you are constantly bombarded with accusations of your imperfections and self-loathing and self-hatred, and it can be manifested in somebody who gave that to you, like your mother, or it could just be your own mind attacking you. And when you try to defend yourself, it's a small voice, it's a weak voice, and it's easily overpowered and crushed. And so even though he does try to defend himself, and that little voice is there to try to defend himself too, it's not enough, and ultimately he gets stuck in the ground, as was also referenced earlier when he was chained in place. Now he is stuck to the boat, which ultimately capsizes and he drowns, which is just such a beautiful metaphor of what it's like to be trapped and drowning in your anxiety or depression or any one of those mental illnesses. So the overall umbrella message and metaphor of this movie is dealing with anxiety and depression and fear and all of these different things going on when your drugs are wrong or you shouldn't be on drugs at all. But on a more personal level, there's a lot of things going on specifically with Beau and his mother that have him hating himself, afraid of himself, ashamed of himself. And so maybe this won't work for everybody as a horror movie. There wasn't a whole lot that was horrifying about this movie, but it was definitely thought-provoking. And to be fair, this is all just a theory. I think there's so much more about this movie that I still don't understand yet. So what do you think this movie means? Let me know in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Thanks guys, bye!